There is something about the word discipline that immediately creates a reaction because for many people it brings up the idea of restriction, routine, or doing things you do not necessarily feel like doing. And it is often associated with rigidity rather than freedom. But if you look closely at your own experience, you will probably notice that the moments where life feels most overwhelming, inconsistent, or frustrating are often the ones where there is a lack of structure, where decisions are made based on mood, and where there is no clear system guiding what you do and how you do it. And that contrast is worth paying attention to because it begins to show that discipline is not really about control. It is about creating stability in a way that allows you to function more effectively, especially when things around you feel uncertain. Hi, I'm Bhavna, founder of the Inspirited Life Co. And on this channel, we explore leadership, lifestyle, and personal growth through reflection and real life experiences, creating space to think more clearly about how we live, how we work, and how we lead ourselves. What I have come to understand over time is that discipline is often misunderstood in the same way as confidence is. Because people assume it requires constant motivation or a certain personality, when in reality, it is built through small, consistent actions that remove the need to rely on motivation altogether. If you think about it, most people wait to feel motivated before they take action, whether it is starting something new, following through on a commitment, or even doing something as simple as maintaining a routine. And while that may work occasionally, it is not sustainable because motivation is not consistent. There are days when you feel energized and focused, and there are days when you do not. And if your actions depend on how you feel, then your results will become inconsistent. Discipline works differently. It creates a structure where action is not dependent on mood, but guided by clarity. And that shift is what changes everything. In my own journey, especially while balancing a demanding career with personal responsibilities, discipline was never something I consciously labeled at the time. But it was something I relied on without realizing it. There are responsibilities that needed attention, regardless of how I felt, decisions that needed to be made, and situations that required consistency. And over time, I began to notice that the only way to sustain that level of responsibility was to create systems that reduced the need to constantly decide what to do next. For example, preparing for meetings, planning my day, and structuring my priorities were not things I did occasionally. They became part of how I operated. Because without that structure, everything felt reactive. And when everything is reactive, it becomes exhausting very quickly. What discipline did for me was remove that constant decision making. It created a rhythm. And that rhythm made things easier, not harder. There is a well-known perspective often shared by James Clear, where he speaks about how you do not rise to the level of your goals, but fall to the level of your systems. And when you look at discipline through that lens, it becomes less about forcing yourself to do things and more about creating systems that make the right actions easier to follow. Because when there is no system, everything depends on willpower, and willpower is limited. But when there is a structure, you reduce the number of decisions you need to make, and that creates consistency. And consistency is where progress happens. There is also an important psychological aspect to this. The more decisions you have to make throughout the day, the more mentally fatigued you become. And when that fatigue builds, your ability to make intentional choices reduces. Which is why by the end of the day, it often feels harder to do things that require effort or focus. Discipline helps reduce that fatigue. Not by adding more to your day, but by simplifying it. By deciding in advance what matters, what needs to be done, and how you are going to approach it. And that creates a sense of control. Not control over everything, but control over how you respond. For me, one of the biggest shifts was realizing that discipline is not about doing more. It is about doing what matters consistently, even when things around you are changing. It is about showing up in a way that aligns with your priorities rather than reacting to whatever feels urgent in the moment. And that is where discipline begins to feel less restrictive and more freeing. Because instead of constantly thinking about what you should be doing, you already know. And that clarity reduces stress significantly. If you reflect on your own experience, you may notice that the areas of your life that feel more stable are often the ones where there is some level of consistency. Whether it is how you manage your time, how you approach your work, or even how you take care of your energy. And the areas that feel most chaotic are often the ones where there is no clear structure. So the shift here is not about becoming more disciplined in a rigid or forceful way. It is about creating small, consistent systems that support you, rather than relying on motivation that may or may not show up. Because discipline is not something you force. It is something you build. And once it is built, it supports you in ways that make everything else easier. If you feel like this is something you've been experiencing, where consistency feels difficult, or you find yourself starting things but not following through, then this is exactly the kind of work I explore more deeply through my Clarity and Confidence Reset one-on-one sessions. These sessions are not about rigid routines or unrealistic expectations, but about understanding your patterns, creating clarity around what matters, and building systems that support you in a way that feels sustainable and aligned with your life. If that feels relevant for you, you will find the details in the description. If this has given you something to think about, take a moment with it. Because often it is not about making a big change immediately, but about noticing something small that begins to shift how you see things. These conversations are really about building that awareness over time, because the way we think, respond, and lead ourselves does not change overnight. It evolves through reflection and intention. In the next video, we will explore habits and how small, repeated actions connect to what we have spoken about today in a way that may not be immediately obvious, but often makes a significant difference once you begin to see it clearly. Until then, stay with the awareness you have gained here, because that is where real change begins. Stay happy, stay inspirited. Bye.